What's the least social country in Europe? Story 1. I haven't really been bothered anywhere in Europe except the occasional crazies you get everywhere. Might be different if you're a woman, though. In any case, Nordic countries are a safe bet, especially Finland and Sweden. Story 2. Scandinavia, Germany, Netherlands, Czech, and Poland. Actually, Czech and Poland are the only countries where no native ever spoke even one word to me besides hospitality workers, even when traveling with kids, which usually invites to lots of conversations. So from my experience, Czech Republic and Poland are the ones you are looking for. Story 3. My first thought would be Finland as well, even though I've never been. It's just what I've heard. Ireland would not be a good choice. No one here minds their own business and will talk to you a lot. That goes for all the Med countries too. French will probably ignore you, especially if they don't think you speak French. Story 4. I am from Finland and can confirm, I love that it is absolutely okay to stay in your bubble if you feel that way. Austria has a similar vibe I felt, so it was really easy to navigate Vienna. Story 5. I don't think you should let that stop you from visiting the countries and cities you want to see, honestly. I've been all over Europe, but I don't think I've ever talked to someone there, except when I needed something, for example, at a shop and couldn't find it. I don't think people will randomly walk up to you and strike up a conversation, but you might regret not seeing all the things you wanted to later. In Europe, we're mostly more reserved than Americans, especially in big cities. Story 6. Czech Republic would be good for this. You can smile or say hi, and Czechs won't even acknowledge that you exist. Just don't get into an elevator or enter a doctor's office waiting room. In both cases, their perception is almost magically heightened to acknowledge other beings in their vicinity. Story 7. Poland. We don't talk to strangers. We don't go to small talks with strangers. We don't smile towards strangers. Everyone in the bus mind his own business. Nobody gonna help you in shop if they see you struggle unless you ask. You can navigate through bigger cities without help. Story 8. People mind their business everywhere. You don't have to socialize with anyone you don't want to. People don't chat with strangers randomly, especially not with tourists, and especially if the other person doesn't want to chat. If you go to a restaurant or a museum, then you can just point and use only a few words to order what you want. So in my experience, people usually leave you alone. Story 9. I once had an Estonian tell me they have a joke in their country which goes, "How do you know when you're talking with a sociable Estonian? They look at your shoes rather than their own." Story 10. In the south of England, people are polite, but won't talk to you without reason, and sometimes even with reason. You're seen as a lunatic if you try and talk to someone random. People will just walk around stores lost rather than ask for help from the people whose job it is to help you. Our government has one of the best digital services in the world precisely because we wanted to avoid people. Story 11. Why not just bring pen and a notebook, with a note attached to the notebook stating that you have trouble speaking? I can hear you perfectly, but have trouble speaking is communication in written English. Okay? It doesn't say that you can't speak, but it gives a quick explanation on why you prefer to be nonverbal. Yes, it still requires you to interact with people, but on the other hand, if you feel safe enough to speak, it also doesn't say that you absolutely can't if you want to. If you have the means to travel, please do. Don't let your stutter isolate you. And if you still prefer less interactions, I guess the northern half of Europe is what you're looking for. Not just the Nordics, but the northern parts of continental Europe as well. Story 12. Hungary is antisocial in that here everyone hates everybody else. Hungarians hate their neighbors, their family members, the small establishment that prospers on the corner, their public services, their government, their opposition, anyone who thinks, looks, or acts differently, or has a different set of personal values. They hate their international neighbors and their supposed allies, and they hate the enemies their govt want them to love. Honestly, Hungary is one of the most depressing nations on earth. But if you will just shut your mouth and mind your own business, they will ignore you. Story 13. Greenlanders are notorious for never using a word more than they absolutely have to. Story 14. Sweden, Stockholm, or the places north of Sundsvall are places where people surely mind their own business. Don't go to Gothenburg or Malmö. They are far too social compared to Stockholm. I would say northern Sweden is just as socially reserved as Finland, but a bit warmer, friendlier, as in people actually smile sometimes. Story 15. Stay at a Travelodge in London. Automated check-in, use the tube to get around paying with card or if no chip, getting oyster from machine. No one talks to strangers on the tube unless they are drunk or mentally ill, and book tickets to attractions in advance nearly everywhere can be booked online, so you just then show the ticket. Londoners generally will not talk to strangers. You could easily go 2 weeks and barely need to say a word. Story 16. IMO 90 of European cities are like that. You are expected to shut up if you don't have anything to say or ask about, no matter whether you go to Poland, Germany, Sweden, or even most of Italy. Rural areas are obviously different in that regard. Story 17. In Sweden, it really depends. In bigger cities with 50K people, it's a lot more common for people to be less social. When it's a smaller city, people are more open and social. Also, older people are usually more social. Story 18. Germany and Scandinavia. Germans won't normally acknowledge your existence, except when in a doctor's dentist's waiting room. It's customary to greet the waiting room at a healthcare provider, but they will go back to ignoring you once you're outside. Some Germans will also shout at you if you cross the street in the wrong place or at the wrong time. E.g., red light at a crossing, but they aren't looking for a conversation. Story 19. It's probably Finland, but I wanted to say that even Italy has introverts. If you go to the northern part in regions like Piedmont, sometimes you will wonder if you are still in Italy, or if you somehow ended up in Sweden. Story 20. Stuttering could actually be an advantage when communicating in non-English countries. I assume you talk a bit slower than an average English native speaker, so people who don't understand English that well will have an easier time to process what you're saying and what you mean. Most people I know struggle with English, and they would definitely appreciate someone who takes their time to speak in English. So don't be afraid of speaking in Europe. You'll get extra brownie points if you learn to say thank you and hi in the local language of the country you are visiting. No matter how badly you pronounce the non-English words, people will be amazed by your effort. Except, maybe in France. Don't go to France. Story 21. As a tourist, it is easy to avoid social encounters with local people. Just show disinterest in it, and people generally leave you alone. And the people who don't are more than likely people you should avoid anyways, like scammers, pickpocket, junk merchants. So plan your trip. Go visit the places you want to see. You can manage most of the time with how much? One, please. Yes, no. Thank you. Or even less than that. Remember, you are in charge. Don't let your challenges rule you. Story 22. People are saying Northern Europe, but I wouldn't be so sure about that. I feel like Swedes, Danes, and Lithuanians are outwardly kind and sociable people. Meanwhile, here in Czechia, you say hello to a stranger in public at most, if anything at all. Story 23. No matter how big of a douchebags French and other people are, there's a line drawn at disabilities and no one will abide or make fun of you because you stutter. Story 24. Better to solve the problem than hide it. I would suggest you to go to a place that is the opposite. Very social. This will help more than avoiding it, which will lead to even worsening it. Psychologically speaking, but if a specialist suggested you otherwise, do so. Im not MD social countries in many cases are very open. You don't have to feel humiliated or something. Actually, most people are going to love you. Isolation is not the solution in this case for me. Worst case, pretend that you can't speak if a stressful situation arises, or that you don't speak that language. I just wanted to state a different perspective, opinion, nothing more. Story 25. Nordic countries, Switzerland, and to some extent, Germany, Netherlands. But honestly, in most places, you are left alone anyway. Avoid super touristic places as it always have people asking for money, selling stuff, NGOs, etc. Story 26. Finland and Scandinavian countries in general seem to be the go. Not only that, but they're pretty progressive, and I'd imagine they'd be patient, supportive, and not condescending of your stuttering if you wanted to speak. Enjoy your travels. Story 27. There is nothing humiliating in speech impediments, and you should not let your decisions to be influenced by your stutter. I also have one, and I have never experienced any humiliation for it whilst traveling. You won't either. Travel wherever you'd like to. Story 28. Hey, Finnish here. I work remotely 4 days a week preparing documentation for a large company. After work, I do gaming, and weekends I stay at my farm. Most of my socializing is with dog walkers who stop to chat with me at the farm. I am happy. Story 29. I'm an American who lives in Sweden and is trying to learn the language. I was told no one would talk to strangers, but people randomly try to talk to me all the time. I have no idea what they're saying. They seem friendly though, since they're genuinely smiling. A few switch to English and get embarrassed for talking to me, but that's it really. Swedes are pretty nice and quiet, but not antisocial. Story 30. Depending on where you go in Germany, people will greatly appreciate you not talking beyond single-word phrases. Those are often optional. This only applies when you keep out of social settings like bars. But as long as you use discounter supermarkets, public transport, and chain restaurants, you'll be able to get by with a minimal amount of talking. Memorizing words like "Karte you want to pay by card" and "Gleichfalls" answer to "have a good day." You might be able to exist for a prolonged time without anyone even noticing you're a foreigner. I'm personally less and less a fan of this and would like people to warm up a little, but it might suit your needs. Story 31. From experience? UK. I approached people because I wanted to ask for directions, and it was like they just looked straight through me and kept going. I hated it there, but hey, if you don't want to be bothered, that's the perfect place. Story 32. Nege oida. My vote goes to drumroll Austria, and more specifically Vienna. Lived here for about 7 months now, and breaking into society and making friends is like a bullfight, even for an extrovert B2 German speaker like myself. In the words of Christopher Waltz, firstly, Austrians are very polite, and secondly, they don't mean it. Story 33. Do the opposite. Go to Spain. The moment you hear how poorly they speak English with yet such confidence, then every shortcoming of your own will seem negligible. Story 34. I live in the UK, and the vast majority of people I've met here doesn't know how to be a real friend to someone. They will hang out with parties or other big events and pretend to all be friends with each other, but they are utterly incapable of forming close bonds, apart from maybe the one best friend they have managed to keep from primary school. Story 35. Norway can be decent. That said, I hope you consider to take this trip as a chance to give less shits. After all, you'll never see the people again. Does it really matter if it takes you a few tries to get out a word? I know, easier said than done, but still. I hope you find ways out of this, and travel can be a brilliant way to rearrange the noggin a bit. Story 36. Belgium is a good option. Every week or so on Our Belgium, there is a post about expats being depressed because they don't get social contact and can't make friends. Story 37. I think it depends on what you mean by social. I would say most countries' random social interactions aren't super frequent, but they occur more often the more south you go. I've been to many places in Europe and also America, and the US is insanely more social in that regard, where random people just come up to you to talk. Story 38. Sweden. I've lived here since I was 4 years old, born in Poland, and still have a hard time sometimes with the lack of interactions. Other days I think it's a relief that no one bothers me. Story 39. UK, well, England, we're pretty good at keeping to ourselves and reading social cues if people want to be left alone, especially in the South. People are friendly if you want us to be, but we'll leave you alone if it's obvious you don't. I hear Finland is extremely unsociable. People go out drinking and saying nothing to each other for the whole evening. That might be good too. Story 40. I think you shouldn't stop yourself from traveling just because of that. Otherwise, you will be confined only to cold weather Europe. But maybe that is your vibe. If for you is that humiliating, I would suggest you to keep a note on your phone that says you have trouble talking. People are not, they won't treat you badly if you are trying to, for example, check into an accommodation and you let them know you can't talk. They will accommodate to your necessities. And if you ever feel you want to actually try to communicate verbally, nobody will judge you. Personally, I met several deaf from birth people while traveling. They could speak but with difficulties, and nobody ever called them out. Everyone was just trying to communicate with them normally. You're going to have to find a very evil person to be made fun of a disability, no matter how social the country is. So remember that if a person is being mean to you because of your stutter, they are the problem, not you. Story 41. IDK, why people keep recommending you countries without mentioning the fact that you'll still need to talk at some point, whether to order food in a restaurant or at passport control, assuming you're non-EU. If you go through passport control, the officer could ask you many questions if they feel the obligation arises. Moral of the story is, you're still going to have to talk due to dudette. It's easier said than done, but you've got to learn to own your stutter. It's what makes you, you. And through the passage of time, you will make advances with it and not let it define you so much. Look at Joe Biden. He still has one. Story 42. A Finn here. You don't need to communicate that much. We can be sociable but have no problem being quiet. It's acceptable to be shy or served whatever. And I bet you won't be judged or anything like that if you stutter. Story 43. You can go everywhere. I was walking in the streets of Porto and no one asked or start talking with me out of nowhere. And southern nations are pictured as more social. But basically, if you want, they will talk with you. But if you just mind your business, 90 of people would not start conversation with you, especially in Czech, Poland, and other northern Slavic countries. Story 44. I'm kind of the opposite in that I try to talk to strangers when I travel speech therapy kid. But here's my experience as an American. Pretty much anywhere except Romania or Turkey. I know, quasi-Europe to most, but wanted to add it for reference of how far I'd gone until people talked to me without me pushing it. Lowell, you're good. The more North and Western Europe you go, the less you'll get people talking to you. I'm pretty social, and found very few people in most European countries will try to just talk to you if you're a tourist or stranger if you stick to larger cities, much like the US. Now go to smaller towns and a lot of older people will talk you up, which I love. Also smaller bars, people will talk to you. With your stutter, are there certain phrases you can memorize to use? It's a trick like with memorizing lines from plays I remember in speech therapy. If you can just shake your head and say, sorry, I cannot speak language, 99 of people don't continue talking to you or just gesture. You can also carry translated cards or use Google Translate to communicate, which most people seem okay with. This is just my experience from 2019 present over multiple trips, and I know won't be everyone's experience. Going with someone or finding people to meet up with who get it may be your best bet if you're very worried. Story 45. You can come to northern Italy like Liguria, and no one here speaks English because they don't care to learn about anything outside their bubble. They're frigitive. But if you're looking for people to leave you alone, it's a sure bet. But if you're also hoping for politeness, then look elsewhere. Story 46. I think rather than seeking a place that is less chatty, maybe it's good to find country cities where you won't get mocked over your speech strutters. I think if you find strangers poking fun at your speech, a horrifying prospect, it may be better to avoid these places. I personally don't think any country in Europe will be bad for poking fun at strangers over this, especially since it is considered extremely bad taste for being unemphatic over speech strutters. It may pay to spend less time in overly big smoke places or super touristy areas and go to smaller areas. People will be more understanding and patient in talking to you and address your queries. Hope this helps. Story 47. To be honest, most places people will leave you alone. This isn't America. People generally don't start small talk like that, especially not in big cities like London or Paris. But if you really want somewhere with talking, kept to an absolute minimum, then Finland is your destination. Story 48. I think nearly all Nordic countries is more or less fully digitalized. Nothing happens in person anymore, other than ordering a beer at a pub. So that might be a place to start. Story 49. Please don't ever let your stutter hold you back from experiencing life to its fullest. Hold your head up high and own your life. I know that me saying that is easier said than done, but you deserve to live your life how you want to. Story 50. I just traveled Europe last year. Did a bunch of countries and didn't really have any problems with people bothering me. They would generally only interact with me if I initiated the interaction. Most people are with others or locals, so you're their least concern. I also saw a bunch of single people at hostels who kept to themselves, and they had no issues. It basically comes down to you wanting to interact with people. If they realize you don't speak the language, they will usually just leave you alone. They may try to talk in broken English, but remember, they're just trying to be friendly, and any reciprocation will be appreciated, even if you may have a few issues speaking. People are generally good-natured and friendly all over the world. They're not looking to make anyone feel bad or make fun of them. If you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone. You can always use Google Translate as well. Type in what you want to say and show them the screen or have it read out loud. I had to do that a few times. Anyway, you look at it. Take the trip, you won't regret it. Don't let this hold you back from experiencing the world. There's too many places and cultures to experience to let this hold you back. Story 51. Go to any Russian-speaking country. They are very friendly people but won't initiate conversation or even smile at you without a reason, unless they already know you or get an introduction from a friend. Story 52. In my experience, that would be Norway. I remember how we parked the car in a ditch and couldn't get it out. Some old guy on a tractor drove by, backed up, hooked up his tractor to our car, dragged us out, tipped his hat, and drove off. Never said a word. Genius. Story 53. In Lithuania, people keep to themselves and there's lots to explore. I had an excellent time in their capital, Vilnius. But in general, if you want to go to Europe, go see what you want to see. There are assholes everywhere, but I find European travelers, which you will usually meet in hostels where you may stay, to be very kind. So don't stress too much and come have a good time. Story 54. In terms of their own people, Germany. You can do everything and get anything you want. The only prerequisite for this is that you don't have a German passport. Story 55. I am literally on an interrail trip that started in Austria and am now in Finland, and can absolutely confirm people are very quiet and distanced here. We knew this before and are still surprised. Story 56. Okay, let's get that sorted out. Anywhere you go, you'll find nick-shitty people, quiet loud people, hospitable, not-so people, open defensive people, and so on. Trust me, I live in Germany and have been to each European country except Greece and Ukraine. Story 57. You could go to Germany, especially if you like hiking. There are lots of remote places you can go to be alone, but also in the cities you can just mind your own business. Maybe go to a location that's close to a border to neighboring countries, so you visit more than just one place without having to drive or take a train ride for too long. Story 58. I don't know it personally or experienced it, but I heard the northern countries are more likely to mind their business and aren't the most social or outgoing people. Story 59. Not sure about other countries, but in Germany, people usually don't even say hi anymore, and talking is extremely awkward. Talking to a stranger is a semeth I do once every like 3 months, not including salesmen and people at checkouts. Story 60. Going to Denmark was really weird. I think I know what it feels like to be hated, ignored, and generally feeling like you don't exist. The people there didn't even speak to each other when waiting for a bus. There was literally 1 meter space between people. Nobody was doing anything. It was so strange because in my country, people would just start talking about any old like the weather or something. Story 61. I've been in Germany for 25 years. People here are mostly anonymous in their daily lives. There's no small talk in stores. I've seen the same people every single day for years, and we've never exchanged a single word. Story 62. Statistics won't help you, unfortunately. You will find assholes everywhere. People who comment on everything that's none of their business. I think the best you can do is to be self-confident, just like anywhere else on the planet. It's easy to say and really hard to do don't give a about people. You might have a stutter, but the people who are giving you about it have reached their peak mental capacity and will never be able to grow in life. You, on the other hand, might talk in a way that's unusual, but you're going to places and put yourself out there. You already are way ahead of the majority of people. Also, Vienna could be a good place. I keep hearing it's hard to make connections, which makes me believe I'm from Vienna, just dislike humans in general. Can't say I disagree. Just leave me be and go about my business. Story 63. Don't choose your destination on these grounds. No one will bother you wherever you go, and no matter what, you'll occasionally need to talk to people to buy things and so on. Your choice of country really won't make a difference, so go to the places you find interesting. Story 64. Germany, but only the big cities like Berlin. Pretty much just Berlin is so unfriendly mostly that you don't even need to speak at all. Netherlands, Amsterdam too. Pretty unsocial with anyone. Story 65. I found the people in Belfast to be rude jackasses. Was a huge shock after visiting Southern Ireland. The best thing about visiting Belfast was taking the ferry to Scotland. Story 66. Everyone's saying go to a Nordic country. Nordic people are crazy. Also a lot of fun, but mainly crazy. I would recommend East and Northeast Germany. Lots of beautiful buildings and nature, and the people keep to themselves. Story 67. Not the least social, but I'm from Austria, and it would not be a surprise if no one talked to you randomly in 6 months, except maybe some crazy or old people booth conversations. It would be valid. Do your part. If you would be nodding. I feel like in Spain people talk to you a lot more, but maybe it's also because I was a tourist. Cyprus Aswell. Story 68. I solo backpacked 17 countries a few years back, solely staying in hostels. If your goal is to go alone and stay alone, power to you. But people in the country you are in, and if you take the hostel route, hostels, are not usually from the country you are in, meaning if you try and go to a more socially reserved country, you will meet lots of people who want to chat, which is what I found to be a beautiful thing. I met the most caring, fun, and adventurous people in hostels. I would recommend seeking discomfort and meeting new people. It could change you. It did me. Don't think I met a single person who would have cared if I had a stutter. Story 69. First of all, stutter is not humiliating. You are harsh to yourself, but also to people reading this that also stutter. Just visit the countries and places you want to see. Even in most friendly countries, nobody just starts to talk to you without a reason. And if you do need something, don't be afraid to speak. Most people will be patient to hear you out. Or when you need something, write it in Google Translate in language of the country. That way, you don't need to talk if it's too hard for you and people will only think that you don't know language. But please, don't think it's humiliating. Please change the way you see yourself. Story 70. In every country there are a lot of good people, and assholes are everywhere also. Even in the smallest village anywhere in Europe, you can run into the village idiot who will not be social. I have a friend who has a stutter, and he owns his own business in the Netherlands. Totally okay for everyone. Story 71. For me, France is one of the most unsocial countries. Honestly, I don't remember seeing any friendly smiles or having nice chats with people there. Paris. Story 72. From places my friends come from who are from all over Europe, I would say Finland. It's ridiculous. What some of the rules are, for example, you can't take your beer outside in a bar. The server has to bring it outside for you by law. Often companies hire PPL, then fire them close before testing phase ends, and then tell them to come back again later. That way they don't have to pay as much or something. You can't say that politicians lie. You may get in big trouble if you do. PPL-wise, so far, the Finnish PPL I know are awesome PPL. Just a lot of stupid going on. Story 73. I can only speak of the country I live in, Germany. You don't have to utter a word to get around, except for ordering stuffs without a menu. I hate having to interact with people. I don't talk to strangers. And here, luckily, the only strangers that will try to strike up a conversation are tourists. Story 74. I wrote a long post about various places, then deleted it. Because A, there's no perfect place to go to whatever your goal. And B, it seems to me you're asking the wrong question. As in, how can I avoid facing my challenges, fears, instead of what could maybe help overcoming my fears. I know that from your point of view, Legitimately, this might sound belittling and insulting, and I won't be offended if you choose to express that. But I honestly don't think you'll have any kind of European experience if you limit yourself to places you think you won't face challenges. Though, sudden afterthought, if the Trans-European train ticket, not its actual name, I forgot that, still exists, you could buy that and try to get window seats on trains all over the EU and just enjoy the views. Put on headphones to avoid being talked to. I did something like that on a smaller scale at one point in my life, if in EA, and it was marvelous. Lastly, question, do you know sign language? I have a friend, a scientist actually, who also struggles with stuttering, and they in some circumstances resorted to that, or indicating it's their way to communicate, even though technically they can talk. Usually people try to accommodate them. Please pardon the length of this. I hope something or other of it might be helpful to you. Edit typing error. Story 75. Czech or Slovakia, maybe. Czech is the only country where people have told me to my face to just stop talking to them and go away. Slovaks generally didn't even respond to my attempts to communicate and blanked me completely. Love both countries, but they were not very social in my experience. Story 76. Come to Stuttgart, Germany. We are the most close-minded people when it comes to meeting new people in the whole of Europe. I've been around the world and no one wants to talk less to a stranger than people in Stuttgart. Story 77. Currently living in Bavaria. Very antisocial people in my experience. The most I talk to people is transactional, i.e. waiters or cashiers. They'll typically help you if you ask for it. And they're generally nice people, but they just don't talk to strangers. And when you do speak with them, it's just here's your total, cash or card, have a good day. Like I said, nice people, but they come off as cold and uncaring, don't have any reason or want to talk to strangers. Story 78. We Austrians just lost the first place for the unfriendliest country of the world, but we're still first place in Europe. So I would say we are the most antisocial. So, I would say welcome. But then again, I hate tourists. Stay home, stranger. Story 79. That's a really nice question. Totally the opposite way of what people usually ask. Just to make sure I totally understand the reason you ask and do not make fun of it. I hope very much for you that you find your spot, and even more that, if you mind, find a place where you can improve your speaking and people will support you and make you feel comfortable. Story 80. I don't think it's particularly reasonable to answer this question by distinguishing between countries. Maybe there are some tendencies in general, but similarly, it is true that you will find the people you are looking for in every country, and vice versa, can make bad experiences in every country. Story 81. It's not the country that matters. It's the people you interacted with. Likely, if you are traveling, you will meet other travelers if you stay in places like hostels. That said, it shouldn't stop you at all, so I really hope you consider visiting more than just the less social ones because it should be a trip of a lifetime. Story 82. Scandinavia in general will be your friend, but also Germany and England. These are also the countries where you'll get by with English as lingua franca. Story 83. Come to Hamburg, Germany, and other parts in northern Germany. People don't chat each other up. If they did, it would be considered perfectly normal to kindly smile and nod, or say sorry, and just walk away. Story 84. I'm 42 years old, living my whole life in Germany and no stranger has ever randomly talked to me, ever. And no, I'm not particularly ugly or threatening. Story 85. Germany. You will be left alone, but they are usually polite and very helpful if asked for directions. Not in rural eastern Germany maybe, but it fits the rest of the country. And noon cares if you stutter or not. You can just as easy communicate with Deep L or any translator if someone does not speak English. Story 86. Come to Germany. Here you'll get looked at like you are a psychopath if you talk to people on the streets. O and BTW I to support you and show you around. Story 87. Give Vienna a try. If two strangers start a conversation on the street, it's usually just to insult each other for STH. Other than that, people mind their own business. Story 88. Whatever country you visit, English goes fluent from north to rather poor in the south. Start with an explanation, let's say, sorry I'm stuttering a bit, but whatever you want to ask. I have no statistics, but I'd say 99 will have no problem and will not humiliate you. Story 89. I'd like to add Slovakia. I've been here for a little while and an American came to ask for directions, and I even found it strange. I should add, I grew up in Canada. Story 90. Austria. It ranks second place in quality of life and voted second place in unfriendliness by expats. You can do a lot here without talking much to people, and we don't have sellers on the streets trying to accost you. But all in all, it depends what you plan to do. In the countryside, you can do a lot of hiking. Vienna has a lot of museums, and you can visit a few countries with Interrail. Story 91. The more to the north, it is the less social usually. A good climate comes with a more open and social mentality, and with more joy. That's why so many northern countries has big suicide rates even can. They have a better life conditions overall. Story 92. My first choice would be Finland, but I think also the north of Belgium. People who have moved here from other countries have commented on how hard it is to make friends, as we are not a chatty bunch. And a British friend commented on how she had never seen so many people shop in complete silence. Story 93. I misread your question as least socialist ignoring Russia. After a few years of Tory leadership Great Britain, they were trying to be a mini USA. Even the UN got involved. Reading your question again, I would pick a tolerant country which understand your language well, English, I presume, like Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, or maybe even Finland. The latter are very efficient with words and appreciate silence. The Scottish are a tolerant mad bunch as well, but very social, and you can make them stutter with phrases like purple burglar alarm. Story 94. Sweden. For sure, I had to be in Stockholm for work visit for a duration of 2 months, and the only people who I was able to talk to were some waiters and cashiers, if they didn't have self-checkout. I couldn't make any friends out of work, and believe me, I am a very social person. Story 95. Go for the Baltic states. It seems like the Soviet influence made people very wary of each other, and talking to strangers in public more than absolutely necessary is seen as inappropriate. Story 96. You can navigate lots of Finland or capital area, at least without talking to anyone if you make the choices. You can get tickets to attractions via apps or online services, groceries from self-checkout, self-service hotels such as Noli, and the culture is generally sparsely worded. People generally won't talk to you unless they have a functional reason. Add to this, there is a possibility that an odd drunkard will approach with small talk, but it's safe to ignore and continue on your merry way. This is even more likely on weekend evenings and nights.